And so you ended up becoming a quadruple who. How is that even possible? Do you think you're done with UVA degrees, or are you going to go for one more?
Yeah, no, my wife told me I'm absolutely done.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Ryan, president of the University of Virginia, and I'd like to welcome all of you to another episode of Inside UVA. This podcast is a chance for me to speak with some of the amazing people at the university and to learn more about what they do and who they are. My hope is that listeners will ultimately have a better understanding of how UVA works and a deeper appreciation of the remarkably talented and dedicated people who make UVA the institution it is. Today I'm joined by Ben Allen, a Charlottesville native, a quadruple who, a former teacher and assistant principal, a former officer in the Army National Guard, and a current member of the Army Reserves, and the executive director of UVA's Equity Center. Ben's story is deeply connected to the Charlottesville community and the university. In his role at the Equity Center, he's working to bridge the gap between UVA and the local community to ensure that the university is not only a great place to learn, but also a good neighbor. Today we'll be talking about his journey from being a first-generation college student at UVA to leading one of UVA's most significant community initiatives. Ben, it's great to have you.
Jim, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
So you grew up in Charlottesville, and I'm curious, as a kid, what did you think of UVA? Did you interact with UVA? Did you go to games? Did you see yourself as becoming a student here someday?
So growing up, I always went to UVA basketball games over at U-Hall and Scott Stadium, and really that sort of grew my love of being an avid UVA sports fan even today. And one of the things that I often tell people as a first generation student, I didn't realize that UVA was a place that you actually went to after high school, not in a negative way, just didn't really have those types of conversations where, oh yeah, after high school, the University of Virginia is a place you can continue your studies. It really was around different engagements with family events or going to sporting events that I really sort of had the most interaction with UVA.
And when did you first realize that you could go to UVA and or that you wanted to go to UVA?
Yeah, so I had some amazing teachers in high school. And one of the things that around my senior year of high school, I had some teachers that were like, you should give college a look. You should try to apply for some schools. And they were like, well, where do you want to go? And really what I started naming was schools that I knew from sports. And so the University of North Carolina, I was a huge Michael Jordan fan. I was like, well, I want to go to UNC. And so I applied to several ACC schools, Clemson, UNC, Wake Forest, and one of my counselors and teachers was like, you should give the University of Virginia a look. And was really fortunate to have a great support network to help me apply, do the prerequisites. I had decent enough grades and a pretty compelling story to where I was able to get accepted to all of those schools because of those teachers and that sort of village I had around me.
Wow. And how did you end up choosing UVA?
So I went down to UNC, I had all the gear, I was sure I was going to go to UNC, and one of the things at the time, the University of Virginia just started the University Achievement Award and Access UVA, and out of state UNC compared to in-state complete basically full ride at UVA is what sort of solidified me coming to UVA. And I say that in an incredible positive way. I didn't know what I didn't know at the time, and that was the barrier that was removed from me in order to attend this school.
And so you ended up becoming a quadruple who. So how is that even possible?
I would not recommend it. It is something that, I did a bachelor's as an undergraduate student. And when I was completing my undergraduate studies, like many fourth years, I was trying to grapple with what I wanted to do when I grew up. And again, I remembered those teachers and really the reason why I was able to attend school. And I was like, you know what, I want to go and become an educator. And so I went and got a master's of teaching at the School of Education. While I was teaching in DC and then here in Charlottesville, I decided that, I really want to be a school administrator. And so I got another master's to become a school administrator, and I wasn't quite done. So I decided that really to look at both the research and the systems that are at play within our education system, I really want to do a doctorate. And so that's why I pursued a doctorate in school administration from the School of Education as well.
So do you think you're done with UVA degrees, or are you going to go for one more?
My wife told me I'm absolutely done. And I think I am too. I think the learning that I can get now is sort of on the job and just from experiences from other people. I think the formal classroom setting may be done for a little bit.
So while you were here as an undergraduate, you really threw yourself into the life of the university. I wonder if you can talk about some of your most meaningful experiences, either in the classroom or outside of it.
I would say, the classroom, incredible experience, right? Like being able to have incredible peers that I went to class with, the faculty, everyone else in the class, to make sure that my undergraduate experience was really incredible there. Out of class, I rushed a fraternity. And so that was an incredible experience. My best friends to this day are from that fraternity. But one of the more interesting pieces that's an incredible icebreaker anytime you have to introduce yourself is I ended up trying out to be caveman. And the story behind it is literally someone was like, oh, they're having caveman tryouts. I bet you won't do it. And I said, I bet you will. And so I went and tried out to go be caveman. And lo and behold, was pretty decent at it and loved it. Ended up being caveman around 2005, 2006. And so if you were at UVA sporting events or anything like that, we probably interacted and you may not even known it.
I bet my kids met you along the way.
Maybe, yeah.
They're big UVA fans. We spent a lot of time going to UVA sporting events. So what makes someone a good cabman? I'm curious. And are you actually allowed to admit that you were a cabman? I thought you were supposed to keep it secret.
So today it's you get like these big reveals today that I see on social media. And I've actually been presenting to current UVA students now. And, I always like to throw that in there to make that connection. I was like, oh yeah, I used to be cabman. And 2 times now, someone after the presentation I gave came up to me and like sort of whispered to me, is like, I'm also caveman. And it was this sort of bond that we had. But back then, it was pretty hard to like keep telling excuses to your friends of like why you weren't going to different things. But one of the more compelling experiences, again, a good like icebreaker story, is I actually went to caveman camp or mascot camp. So it was like me, the Syracuse Orange, the Colgate Raider, the Delaware Blue Hen. And we were in, of all places, Scranton, Pennsylvania. And they literally teach you how to interact with the crowd, how to dance. You do like this huge performance at the end. I still remember it was dancing to Rihanna SOS. That's something that you don't forget. And so, yeah, there's like literally training for how to be a mascot.
I'm really glad to hear that our cavemen are well trained. So tell me a little bit about your teaching career. You mentioned earlier that you were motivated to go into teaching because of your own teachers. What was that experience like?
So one of the best teachers I ever had, his name's Jeff Carpenter. He's actually a UVA alum as well. He got his PhD at UVA. Really sort of inspired me in a way to see, hey, as a teacher, when you have this community built around you in your classroom, you have a great impact on those who come in through your door. And that's both in a academic way, but then also in a way to just support and motivate. And I think because sort of that idea of someone provided for me and someone removed barriers for me, it was, this was a really natural piece for me to go in and become a teacher and be able to sort of have that same impact and create that community within my classroom. And so after graduating, taught in DC public schools for 3 years, an incredible experience. And in about 2013, my wife and I moved back to Charlottesville. We actually taught in the same school for 1 year at Albemarle High School here locally. And the through line throughout my career has been like, with that community that you have with the classroom of students, the 120, 150 students you see, just the impact that you can have and the relationships that you can build in order to sort of remove barriers and to put them on to different opportunities is just sort of been a pretty rewarding career. And I still say teaching is one of the greatest professions that anyone can be a part of, just because of the influence that you can have on someone.
I agree. What drew you back to Charlottesville? Was it because you grew up here? And did you always want to come back? Was it because you and your wife both attended UVA?
Yeah, it was definitely a combination of that. I think we really we enjoyed our time in Charlottesville as students. Obviously, I grew up here, had the relationships, and there was just a piece of being back home that is super powerful and super meaningful. I think being the power of place is really important, and being able to come back and tie into the relationships that I had in order to sort of build that school community that I really desired and really wanted to be a part of.
Now, you also served in the Army National Guard and are currently in the Army Reserves. What motivated you to go that path, and have the experiences and lessons you've learned in there translated into other aspects of your life?
Yeah, 100%. So I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than I am, and she enlisted in the Air Force straight out of high school. Her ship date to basic training was actually September 11th, 2001. That was delayed for 2 weeks. And she is truly what I say is like someone that is a mentor and someone that I really look up to. And she really sort of embodied this idea of service. She ended up completing her bachelor's degree while she was in the service. So she just did her 20 years. She got her degree throughout multiple deployments, living in different locations. And honestly, I really just wanted to follow in her footsteps and just have this idea of service. I also knew that, I really saw myself, and people tell you that you're a leader, but I really wanted to be trained in leadership. And what better organization than someone that's been training leaders for centuries in terms of leadership ethics, leadership values, and how to build collaborative teams. And so that was really my initial motivation. And so actually, I finished my first year of teaching in DC with 17 to 18-year-olds. And then a week after the last day of school, went to basic training in Georgia with 17 to 18-year-olds that were now my peers, and being able to, build that collaborative team. The second part to your question of like how it's influenced my leadership, I would say that logistically, that's what I was trained to be, a military police officer and a logistician. And being that background just really helps me plan, execute, and those types of pieces. But I think just also, again, schools and military and even working in higher ed, it's really not that different when the necessity of the mission and the job is so immense that you have to have this collaborative approach and being able to tap into different skills and expertise in order to complete a task, right? And at the end of the day, all of that is grounded in this idea of trust. And I think the military, it's pretty apparent why that is the case. And so I really try to take those lessons that I currently get trained in. I'm still serving in the reserves right now in order to apply it to sort of my everyday life.
And you not only taught, but you also served as an assistant principal. Is that right? And my guess is, and tell me if I'm wrong, that some of the lessons you learned in the National Guard and the Army Reserves would have been very relevant to being an assistant principal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, planning a movement of 100 plus soldiers is not too different than planning a field trip for a bunch of kindergartners. And so, it really takes a lot of planning and coordination, but also the piece of like leading from the front, leading by example, all of those things are that I espouse to live by and try to model by. And it really was, at the same time, it was interesting. I was sort of getting my leadership training and rising in the ranks of the military at the same time, sort of becoming a teacher and then an administrator. And both of those were happening at the same time while getting my doctorate. And so all of those lessons were happening sort of at the same time. And so I always see it as just this immense tool bag that I've been fortunate enough to have to really dip into when different situations come up of what to respond to, of all these different lessons, all this different education, both formal and informal.
You are now the executive director of the Equity Center, and we are incredibly fortunate to have you. I'm curious what motivated your decision to move from the school system to the Equity Center, and was that a hard decision to make?
Oh, absolutely. I think anytime you leave a school community, when you're tapped into it, it's hard to leave, whatever the reason is, because you become so ingrained in that community with the families, with the students, and you really just become really tight-knit. And so one of the things, going back to your question of sort of like the lessons the military has taught me, we talk about the military, this idea of mission. And this isn't a corny thing. When I saw the job for the executive director at the Equity Center, I was really, really attracted to the mission, not only of the Equity Center, but as the university. And it was important to me that the mission of the Equity Center, I saw it visible in the mission of the university within the strategic plan, that the university had this intent to be a good neighbor and a better neighbor to the Charlottesville community. And so I had this weird set of skills that combined that understanding the community and understanding the university to sort of go in and say, this is something that I would like to look at systemically and how we can repair this relationship and really find these idea of mutual benefit, that what is good for, say, the community and the university, that those things can be the same and not in a zero-sum matter, that we sort of can all benefit from some of these initiatives that we're working on. And I was just super attracted by, let's give this a shot and see if this is going to be a credible thing and if we're actually going to make tangible progress on it.
And you've been at the Equity Center since 2020, and you've already made a huge impact. Just from your own perspective, what are some of the highlights and what are some of your proudest accomplishments so far?
Yeah, if anyone were to ask me, I think that our college and career readiness program, Star Hill Pathways, is probably one of our proudest achievements. And that's essentially is a program that serves local 7th through 12th graders. We provide year-round programming so students understand what it means for different careers, what it means for different college majors. We have experiences on grounds. We introduce them to other schools, tutoring, mentoring, and we have a really awesome staff that comes together to provide sort of this village mentality resource around these students and their families. And the thing I'm most proud about that is sort of working to combine a lot of the community assets that we have here locally, whether it's youth serving organizations in the community or here at the university, and try to find what role we can all play into supporting the youth. I would say the other piece that's maybe a little bit deeper and hard to measure is the trust that I think we've been able to build. And I don't say that lightly. We have a pretty big task ahead of us to sort of bridge a history that predates any of us today. And I think there's a piece that where we acknowledge that context and we look at that history, but to be able to navigate the trust between, local government, community leaders, university staff, faculty, students. There's a lot of stakeholders in there that I think we've been sort of at the center of really since 2019, 2020, and being able to steward all those together towards intentional and tangible change. And it's not always easy, and it's not always the most fluid process, but I think the thing that I see is people still coming to the table, still supporting each other, and still being able to work on the sort of focus areas that we've identified.
What have been the biggest challenges you've encountered so far?
I've been told that I need to be more patient. And I think change takes a long time. And sometimes the change that we're trying to see is very immediate because there's people that are in real need and there's people that need real support. And so trying to get all these individuals together and all these institutions together to work at that is not always the easiest task. And nor do I pretend that it's our job to do that. But I think the change that we want to see is something that we all desire. It's how we get there is sometimes the tension points that really come up. And so I think just being patient and keep stewarding conversations and relationships as deeply as possible is where I think we can still keep going towards that.
Right. You're the executive director of the Equity Center. As I'm sure you know, the term equity has become a charged term, with some suggesting it means guaranteeing equal outcomes and others suggesting it's really about giving everyone a chance to succeed. I'm curious how you define equity and how you think of it, both in terms of the mission of the center and more broadly.
Equity to me is, in its simplistic nature, is removing barriers so that individuals have access to equal opportunities. And once that opportunity is there, that there are supports in place so that success is continued, right? And so I really look at it from the barrier perspective, both from a personal narrative of just seeing barriers that were removed in my life in order to get an opportunity. And we sort of shared some of that through this conversation. But I look at some of our local data and some of our local facts that are in place. When you look at outcomes across anything that we would say measures well-being, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's access to housing, there is a deep gap between race and socioeconomics. We may disagree on how to get there, but that is a fact and it's a truth. And I always say that, we should continue to be curious when we hear words like equity of what is going on. But curiosity to me means that you have to have a conversation first and you have to be able to peel back what is actually happening as opposed to taking it maybe at surface level. And so we publish an annual report every year about the work that we do. We also work very collaboratively with many other resources across the university and the community. And at the end of the day, when I think of the work that we are trying to do, we're trying to make sure that youth have access to college and career readiness. We're working on affordable housing to make sure that everyone from nurses, doctors, firefighters, first responders have access to housing here in this area that they work and serve in. We're looking at health well-being, ensuring something as simple as, translating a document into someone's home language so that they can understand how to schedule an appointment. Well, that's equity. And I think sometimes people take it out of context of what it actually is, when really it's this sort of notion that if someone was in your neighborhood and they're your neighbor, well, if you saw them struggling, most often you would help them. And I think that's what we're really trying to do is like, if I have a resource, that I'm going to try to support them and make sure that I'm going to put someone onto that resource, and also get rid of this notion that it's a zero sum sort of game, that if someone gets a resource, then someone's losing out. I truly believe that, especially here in this area, there is so much wealth in terms of assets and resource that we have, that there's enough to go around. And we're really just ensuring that individuals have access to those opportunities by removing multiple barriers that are at stake based off of where a person lives, based off of their socioeconomic status, and based off of many other factors that they may prevent them from being just a successful contributing citizen to our community.
You talked about the issue of trust and trust between and among UVA and the community. What do you think is the most important factor or factors that establish trust? I agree with you that one of the goals of the Equity Center is to create a stronger relationship between UVA and the surrounding communities, and a relationship that's built on trust. In your experience, what are the concrete steps that foster trust?
There's a couple things that I would say. The first one is actually having something to show. So I think it gets to a point, you have conversations, you have meetings, and you make promises, but being able to literally get stuff done and be able to show that there is actual progress and evidence of that progress starts to rebuild trust. Because before, it is a lot of promises, it is a lot of, well, these things aren't really visible to what's happening. And so how do you just show that there's actual progress and there's actual evidence towards it and things are getting better? The other piece I think about trust is, instead of assuming what needs to be done, having a little bit of humility and asking individuals what they need as opposed to assuming what they need. And I think if we can go to the work of, the President's Council on Community Partnerships, we just celebrated the 5-year anniversary in Washington Park just yesterday. And I think one of the important things about that initiative is, at the outset of it, instead of the university saying, hey, here is what we're going to help the community on, or what we're going to partner on, it was a survey. It was asking, what are the areas that need to be focused on? And even in that, how do we continue to have the right voices at the table to ensure that, one, progress is being made, and if it's not, well, where are the gaps? And it truly is, I think that's what builds the trust, because as individuals, we can have trust, but what we're trying to do is build a trust between two enormous systems and two enormous institutions, and that is the community and the university. And we're dealing with a long history of mistrust. And so how do we keep showing that there's evidence of progress? And keep in mind, I think we've really only been doing this for maybe the past decade in a very, very present and intentional way that's trying to redress some of the historical harm.
Right. When you look at Charlottesville now, what changes do you see from the time that you were a kid?
I think as I've grown, you live in the Charlottesville community, and then sort of going to the University of Virginia, I saw it as like really two separate worlds. Even when I went here as a student, it was almost like you're in this bubble and you didn't even necessarily look outward back into the community. And as I've grown, one of the things that I've seen is those walls slowly being taken down and seeing it as sort of this idea of one community. One of the things that I've said is always exciting to me is like, the students still have the same traditions, the same experiences. I think they're well more involved and very much aware of what's happening around them. And I think that's a positive thing for them to be able to have a space that is seen as this community for them. That's not just the university, but an extension to this community here in Charlottesville and the surrounding county. And so overall, I would just say that it's been an incredible experience to be able to sort of look back and reflect on all of these different pieces. And the story of the university is really a story of me. Like I said, I met my wife here. Cheesily enough, I proposed to her on the rotunda steps. My 2 children were born at UVA Health. The best friends that I have in this world, I met here at the University of Virginia. And it's an imperfect place, but I think what makes me keep coming back is sort of the deep commitment and love for this town and this community to make it better and to do what I can to make it better. And the other thing that has incredibly changed is a national championship for basketball, and I'm hoping to see another one here in the near future.
You and me both. So what makes you excited every day when you come into work? What keeps you going? What makes the work so meaningful to you?
I think I alluded to it earlier. I get to work across an incredible amount of like intellectual wealth, and that is from, school district teachers and principals to the students in K-12. I'll go to a next meeting where I'm talking to a group of amazing university students. I get to go over to the community college at PVCC and work with deans and leaders and students there. I get to work with university staff and faculty, all within the span of just a given day usually. And all of that just shows the individuals that are committed to making our community better. And this may seem very aspirational, but it truly is being able to see all of these different people in different spaces talk about the same problems, but also talk about their care and their solutions to those problems. And so I think that is what keeps me motivated and keeps me coming today, because I know this isn't just about like me or just about the Equity Center. There's an immense amount of partners that have been doing this well before the Equity Center was even branded as a name. And many of those are actually showing up to the table to continue this work with the infrastructure that we're building here at the university.
And is there anything in particular you are looking forward to? What's next for the Equity Center?
I would say as we move into year 5 and onward, we've done a pretty significant job of building an infrastructure. And when you're building an infrastructure, it's, day to day of making sure that processes are in place, making sure that, roles are defined. And I think we're at a place that's exciting to be able to say, okay, this infrastructure is built. Now we can start really doing the immense intellectual 30,000 foot work to be able to see how we can be partners across the university with many other good units who are doing community engaged work and have been doing it well before us, as well as bringing in and elevating more of our community partners that are doing this work as well. And so I know that's a bigger answer to maybe not a specific thing, but it really is just sort of this next phase of like, we've been building this house and now we get to decorate it a little bit and be able to make sure that we're inviting all the right folks in and that people feel seen in this work.
Ben, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed the conversation and I appreciate your taking the time. And I'll end by what I said at the beginning. UVA is incredibly fortunate to have you, and it is a total pleasure to work with you.
This episode of Inside UVA was recorded the week of October 7th, 2024. Inside UVA is a production of WTJU 91.1 FM and the Office of the President at the University of Virginia. Inside UVA is produced by Kokub Rizvi, Benjamin Larson, Mary Gardner-McGee, Matt Weber, and Jaden Evans. Special thanks to Maria Jones and Jane Kelly. Our music is Turning to You from Blue Dot Sessions. Listen and subscribe to Inside UVA on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon with another conversation about the life of the university.